No guy can resist a sweet, innocent-looking girl. Today, I'm going to tell you about the strangest girl I've ever met. But before I begin, please don't forget to leave a like if you enjoy Midnight Fear stories. I'm a 28-year-old man, and I work for a large real estate company. My company assigned me to a project in a beautiful but extremely remote area near one of the isolated villages. When my mom found out I'd be staying there alone, she got worried, just like any mother would. But I actually enjoy being alone and having some peace and quiet, especially since I'd recently broken up with my girlfriend. I thought this would be the perfect chance to clear my head and try to forget about her. I arrived early Sunday morning. A company employee named Jack welcomed me, showed me around the entire area, and took me to the house where I'd be staying. The house sat on top of a hill, with nothing around it except massive mountains and steep valleys. Still, the view from my bedroom window was absolutely breathtaking. During the day, I stayed busy with work and my daily responsibilities. But at night, everything became completely silent except for the sound of the wind and the chirping of crickets. Other than that, there wasn't a single sound after sunset. The first week passed without any problems, and I actually started enjoying my quiet, isolated life. But then, everything suddenly changed. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone humming. I listened carefully. It was the voice of a young woman, softly humming a strange melody. She sounded incredibly close to the house. I figured she had to be a girl from the nearby village, but it seemed strange that she'd be wandering around the hills so late at night. Honestly, I was so sleepy that I decided to ignore it and went back to sleep. The next day, I finished work early and was heading back to the house when I ran into Jack. We talked about work for a while, and then I asked him if anyone lived near the house. He suddenly looked uncomfortable and said, "No, no one lives anywhere near here. Why do you ask?" I replied, "Last night I woke up because I heard a girl singing down in the valley." Well, she wasn't exactly singing, she was humming a really strange melody. He stayed quiet for a few seconds before saying, "It was probably just the echoes of animals in the valley. Sounds travel around here. I'm sure there wasn't anyone." After that, he stayed silent for the rest of the drive. He didn't say another word. The way he reacted and how quickly he denied it made me even more curious about who she really was. That night, I decided to leave the house and find out for myself. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the humming again, the exact same female voice. I stepped out onto the balcony. The night was dark and thick fog covered everything. I couldn't see anything except the towering mountains and the pale moonlight. Then, I saw her. A young woman was standing near my house, staring directly at me with a gentle smile. Honestly, her smile was shy, warm, and strangely captivating. I have no idea how long I stood there just looking at her. Then she started humming again. She slowly raised her hand and waved at me, as if she were saying, "Hello." I smiled and called out, "Hi, do you need any help? Are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just kept standing there, smiling. She wasn't unbelievably beautiful, but there was something about her that completely drew me in. Her smile, her long hair dancing in the wind, her shyness, and that beautiful voice. She waved at me again. This time, I couldn't resist. I walked out of the house to meet her. She was standing only a few yards away. The air was freezing cold, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. I wanted to know who she was. She laughed softly. The sound of her laughter echoed throughout the valley. I smiled to myself. Well, at least she laughed. Then she spoke in the softest voice. "I'm lost, and it's so dark. Could you please help me?" I couldn't bring myself to say no. I simply nodded. She looked at me again and quietly said, "My house is down in the valley. I'm scared to go there alone. Would you come with me?" I don't know what came over me, but before I could even answer, my legs started moving on their own. I followed her as she continued humming that beautiful melody. I felt completely hypnotized. She moved so gracefully, it almost looked like she was floating through the air. Her feet barely seemed to touch the ground. We kept walking for what felt like ever. I had no idea how much time had passed. Then she suddenly stopped humming. When I looked up, my heart nearly stopped. I realized she was walking straight toward the edge of a steep cliff, and that's when it hit me. She had been leading me there all along. If I kept following her, I would fall to my death. No one would ever find my body. Terrified, I shouted, "Where are you taking me? Where?" She suddenly turned around. The moment she faced me, her appearance changed completely. Her eyes bulged out, her bones showed through her skin. Then she let out a terrifying, demonic laugh and grabbed my hand with incredible force. I screamed and tried to pull myself free, but she kept dragging me closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. At that moment, I thought this was the end. The only thing on my mind was my mother and how devastated she would be. Then suddenly, I felt someone pulling me backward. A second later, everything went black. When I finally regained consciousness, I opened my eyes and saw Jack standing right in front of me. On the third day after I had recovered enough to stay awake, Jack was sitting beside me while a doctor checked my pulse. Jack looked at me and said, "This place has been haunted for a very long time. A young woman threw herself off these cliffs after her husband cheated on her. Ever since that day, her spirit has remained here. She tries to lure men to the edge of the valley so she can take revenge on them." I didn't say a single word. All I wanted was to recover, leave that place, and never come back. I will never return to those haunted hills again. And yet, even now, I can still hear the sound of that girl's haunting hum echoing inside my head. It's been 10 years since that Christmas night, but the memories still haunt me to this day, like a shadow that never leaves my side. Before I tell you what happened, don't forget to leave a like if you enjoy Midnight Fear stories. My mom died when I was just a little kid. I was only 8 years old. I went into complete shock and couldn't understand that she was really gone. She was everything to me, the warmest hug, the heart of our home, the one person who made every day feel safe. When she died, it felt like my whole world went dark. I grew up way too fast after that. When I was little, I always heard people say Santa Claus could make wishes come true. I never really believed it, but I figured I had nothing to lose. A few days before Christmas, I did something I never told anyone about. I wrote Santa a letter. I only asked for one thing. I wanted my mom back. Even at 8 years old, I knew it was an impossible wish. Deep down, I knew Santa wasn't real, but I missed my mom so much that I was willing to believe anything if it meant seeing her again. On Christmas Eve, I placed the letter on my bedroom windowsill and went to bed. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Sometime during the night, I felt my entire bedroom shaking. My eyes slowly opened. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I saw it. A huge shadow stretched across the wall. It kept growing and growing until it took the shape of a tall man. For one brief moment, I actually thought it was Santa. But this wasn't the Santa from children's stories. He was unbelievably tall. His body looked twisted, and his eyes burned like fire. He slowly walked toward my bed. It felt like he already knew exactly what I had wished for. He never said a single word. I was absolutely terrified, but hope was stronger than fear. I honestly believed my wish was about to come true. Then the shadow reached out its hand. A second later, my mom appeared beside my bed. I couldn't believe my eyes. She looked exactly like my mother, and yet she wasn't. Her skin was pale gray. Her eyes were completely lifeless. She looked more like a corpse than a living person. She didn't smile. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me with cold, empty eyes that sent chills down my spine. But none of that mattered to me. She was back. That's all I cared about. I threw my arms around her as tightly as I could. She never hugged me back. She didn't even react. Her body felt freezing cold, like I was hugging a block of ice. I looked up at her and whispered, "Mom, I can't believe you're really here. I missed you so much." She never answered. She simply nodded very slowly, like a machine following instructions. I spent hours talking to her, telling her everything that had happened while she was gone. She never responded. She just stood beside my bed all night, watching me. The next morning, Mom sat with us at the breakfast table. She stared at the food, but never touched a single bite. I couldn't wait to see my dad's reaction. I was sure he'd be overjoyed to see her again, but he didn't even look at her. He just kept reading the newspaper like nothing had changed. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dad, aren't you happy Mom's back?" He slowly lowered the newspaper and looked at me with a confused expression. "Tamar, what are you talking about?" That's when it hit me. He couldn't see her. No one could. I was the only person who could. As the days went by, Mom started asking me for strange things. One day, she wanted a lock of my hair. Another day, she asked for a piece of my favorite shirt. Then she wanted one of my favorite toys. Every time I gave her something, she seemed a little more alive. The gray color slowly faded from her face. Her movements became more human. But at the same time, there was something horribly wrong with her eyes. A dark glow, something evil kept growing inside them. One day, I finally asked, "Mom, what are you doing with all this stuff?" She didn't answer. She just smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched wider and wider until it looked completely unnatural. Every night, she stood beside my bed and whispered in a voice that didn't sound anything like hers, "Soon, very soon, Tamar, we'll be together forever." One night, my dad was working late and wasn't home. Mom walked into my room and said it was time to celebrate her birthday. I was excited. I followed her into the living room. The second I stepped inside, my blood ran cold. Strange symbols had been painted all over the walls. Dozens of candles formed a perfect circle across the floor. Their flames cast moving shadows that almost looked alive, like they were laughing at me. My voice trembled. "Mom, what's all this?" She didn't answer. Instead, she began speaking in a language I had never heard before. The words sounded impossible to understand, almost like they weren't meant for human ears. Liham, Leah, Tassar, Ma, Tamar, Tamar. Then she said my name one more time, Tamar. Suddenly, the air became unbearably heavy. The entire room filled with the disgusting smell of something burning. It was so horrible that I could barely breathe. Then her voice changed. It wasn't my mother's voice anymore. It sounded deep, distorted, almost demonic. I tried to run, but I couldn't move.
My legs wouldn't respond. It felt like an invisible force had glued me to the floor. One by one, the candles around the circle burst into brighter flames. Before I knew it, my feet lifted off the ground. My arms were forced upward. I was floating in the air, completely helpless. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I honestly thought I was about to die. Then, right in front of my eyes, my mother began to change. Her body twisted. Her face stretched into something impossible. Her skin darkened. Her eyes burst into flames. Whatever was standing in front of me wasn't human. "Please, stop. I don't want my mom back anymore." I cried as loudly as I could. It didn't care. It just laughed. A slow, cruel, inhuman laugh that echoed through the entire house. That's when I finally understood the truth. This was never my mother. It was something else, something evil, something that had answered my wish, pretending to be her. At that moment, I truly believed my life was over. Then the front door exploded open. My dad came rushing inside. The look on his face told me he couldn't understand what he was seeing, but he knew something was terribly wrong. Without hesitating, he ran straight toward me. He grabbed me with one arm and shouted at the creature, "Stay away from my son, you monster!" The creature let out a deafening scream. Its body twisted violently, as if something had weakened it. That was all my dad needed. He pulled me out of the circle and dragged me toward the front door. We ran out of that house as fast as we could. Neither of us looked back. That was the last night we ever lived there. We never returned. A few days later, my dad went back one final time to collect a few of our belongings. The house was completely empty. The strange symbols were gone. The candles had disappeared. There wasn't a single sign that the creature had ever been there. But one thing remained, that horrible smell. The same sickening smell of something burning still lingered inside the house. From that day on, I never celebrated Christmas again, and I stopped believing that anyone could grant wishes, because if something out there really can, it isn't good. Sometimes the things we wish for are better left lost forever.
I don't trust anyone anymore after what I discovered. I'll tell you everything that happened to me, but before I begin, please don't forget to leave a like if you enjoy Midnight Fear stories. I'm a 20-year-old woman. About 12 years ago, my cousin Yulia lost both of her parents in a car accident. After that, she came to live with us. My mom and dad treated her like their own daughter, and I always thought of her as my sister. We grew up together, and she was only a few years older than me. When she started college, she decided that she wanted to live on her own, away from us. Even though my mom kept trying to get closer to her, Yulia always kept her distance. As soon as she moved out, she completely cut off all contact with us. We tried so many times to reach her, but she never answered our calls. Honestly, I could never understand why she was treating us that way when we had never done anything to hurt her. One day, my grandmother called and told me that Yulia had suddenly shown up at her house in terrible condition. We rushed over as fast as we could to see her. The moment we saw her, we were completely shocked. She looked like a completely different person. Her face was covered in scratches, both of her arms were full of cuts, and she kept moving her eyes in a strange, unsettling way. Sadly, we found out that she had become addicted to drugs, so we immediately took her to a doctor to begin treatment. I'll never forget the nights when she screamed and scratched herself because of the withdrawal symptoms. I felt so sorry for her, but I couldn't stop wondering how her life had reached that point. I wanted to stay by her side, but I had exams, so I had to travel. My parents stayed with my grandmother to take care of Yulia. One night, while I was asleep, I woke up to someone knocking on my door. As I got up, I remember thinking, who could possibly be here this late at night? When I opened the door, it was Yulia. Honestly, I never expected to see her because the last time I spoke to my mom, she told me they had admitted her to a rehabilitation center. Yulia, how did you get here? Are you okay? She didn't answer. She simply smiled and walked into my house. Something about her felt different, but I couldn't figure out what it was. She stood in the living room for a long time, staring at an old picture of us when we were children. Yulia, what's wrong? Does Mom know you're here? She slowly turned toward me and just stared, without saying a single word. It was as if she had forgotten how to speak. She didn't seem normal at all. I thought she must have escaped from the rehab center. I was just about to call my parents when my phone suddenly rang. Hold on for a second, Yulia. Let me answer this call. Stay here. I walked into my bedroom to answer it. Strangely enough, it was my mom. Mom, you're not going to believe what just happened. Yulia is... Before I could finish my sentence, I heard my mom crying. Mom, what's wrong? Yulia is gone. The rehab center just called. They said she cut her wrists. The second I heard those words, my entire body turned ice cold. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. If Yulia was dead, then who was standing outside my room? I slowly turned around. She was standing right behind me. I screamed, and everything went black. I woke up the next morning lying on the floor. When I remembered what had happened the night before, I tried to convince myself that maybe it had all been a dream or just my imagination. Later that same day, I traveled to my grandmother's house to attend Yulia's funeral. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened the night before. That night, I slept in the same bedroom where Yulia and I used to sleep whenever we visited our grandmother as kids. I couldn't stop thinking about her, or about what I had seen the night before. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I woke up to the sound of my alarm. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't move my body. For several seconds, I was completely frozen. I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis. It felt like my entire body was trapped, and I could barely breathe. My jacket was hanging behind the bedroom door. I kept staring at it. Then it looked like it started moving. Slowly, it changed into Yulia. She walked toward me and held out her hands. They were covered in blood. At that moment, I finally broke free from the sleep paralysis. But Yulia didn't disappear. She just stood there, staring at me. What do you want from me? We never did anything to hurt you. We loved you. Please stop tormenting me like this. Just then, my mom heard me shouting and opened the bedroom door. The moment she stepped inside, she saw Yulia standing beside my bed. Yulia slowly turned toward her. My mom let out a horrifying scream, then she collapsed. We rushed her to the hospital after she suffered a mild heart attack. She stayed there all night. The next day, she finally woke up, but she couldn't stop crying. Mom, don't cry. We're not responsible for what happened to her. We stood by her as much as we could. There's something we've been hiding from you for years. What is it, Mom? Yulia isn't your cousin. What do you mean? She's your sister. What? What are you talking about? Your father and I were engaged when we were in college. We made a terrible mistake, and I became pregnant. What? Please, let me finish. We tried to end the pregnancy, but we couldn't. Your aunt couldn't have children, so your father told her everything. She suggested that we keep the pregnancy a secret. After the baby was born, she would raise her as if she were her own daughter. At the time, I was a college student living far away from my family, so I hid my pregnancy until I gave birth. Then your aunt took Yulia. After graduation, your father didn't abandon me. We got married. But every single day, it broke my heart to watch my own daughter grow up calling me aunt. One day, I noticed bruises all over Yulia's body. I realized your aunt and her husband had been abusing her. We called them and threatened to take Yulia away. They argued with us. They found out the truth about everything that had happened years before. They left with Yulia in their car, and that same day, they were involved in the accident. They all died, except for Yulia. You already know the rest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could you hide something like this from me? Putting your mistake aside, why never did you tell me she was my sister? I didn't want you to know what had happened. And besides, she came back to us, didn't she? Are you serious? Your daughter lived her entire life and died without ever knowing who her real parents were. You left her with people who abused her and destroyed her life, and you stayed silent. You're the reason all of this happened to her. I always wondered why she became addicted. I'll never forgive you. I walked out of the hospital filled with anger. It's been 3 years now, and I still haven't spoken to my parents. I can't forgive them for what they did. I even blame myself because there was a time when I thought Yulia was just a spoiled, reckless girl. I had no idea how much suffering she had been through. I wish I had known she was my older sister before she died. I would have done everything I could possibly do to help her heal from everything she had endured. Even today, I still dream about Yulia standing beside my bed. I don't know if it's really her ghost or if it's simply because of the guilt I still feel toward her.
It was our first time being parents, and we didn't have any family around to help us. Our little daughter Rihanna cried all night, every single night. For 2 weeks straight, I hadn't eaten a single hot meal, and I barely got any sleep. Then, out of nowhere, it felt like God had sent us an angel in the middle of all that suffering. We found a flyer taped to our front door. Experienced nanny, certified in first aid, excellent references. Call Eliza. It felt like life was finally giving us a break. Eliza looked perfect. She dressed neatly, spoke softly, and had the calmest voice I'd ever heard. But her eyes, they were empty, like she wasn't really looking at anyone. The moment she picked up Rihanna, my baby stopped crying completely. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried from pure relief. After the first day she watched Rihanna, I slept for 4 straight hours, for the first time in months. But after that, things started getting strange. I'd find Rihanna's toys arranged in weird circles and strange patterns, almost like some kind of ritual. And somehow they were always facing the window. Even stranger, Eliza always showed up before I even called her. Every time she'd smile and quietly say, "I had a feeling you needed me." It was like she was the mother and I was the one who needed taking care of. The baby monitor started turning on by itself. Sometimes I'd hear old songs playing through it, songs I'd never heard before, songs that made Rihanna cry instead of fall asleep. One day I asked her, "What was that song you were singing?" She gave me the creepiest smile and said, "That's something only Rihanna needs." That smile stayed stuck in my head. One day, I pretended to be sick so I could stay home. While hiding behind the bedroom door, I heard Eliza whispering to Rihanna in a language I couldn't understand. Then she said, "They never wanted you, but I do." My whole body went cold. I couldn't move. My husband kept telling me I was exhausted and paranoid from lack of sleep. He said Eliza was amazing with Rihanna. That night, I searched her phone number online. Nothing. No records, no social media, no history. Even the references listed on the flyer turned out to be fake. I wanted to fire her, but I needed proof, so I bought a tiny hidden camera. What I saw on that recording still haunts me. At exactly 3 in the morning, Eliza was standing in Rihanna's room, holding her in front of the mirror, talking like someone inside the mirror was talking back. Then she whispered, "She's almost ready. Now we just have to get rid of the mother." I couldn't breathe. The next day, when she arrived, I quietly followed her. She walked into Rihanna's room and locked the door behind her. I crept over as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she'd hear it. I peeked through a small crack in the wall. She was kneeling on the floor, opening a hidden compartment underneath the bed. I never even knew it existed. Inside, there were pictures of me sleeping, pictures of me in the bathroom, pictures of me holding Rihanna at the hospital right after she was born. That meant she'd been watching us long before we ever met her. The next morning, I told my husband everything. We decided to wait for her together. She walked in smiling, like nothing was wrong. I looked her straight in the eyes. "Who are you? What do you want with my daughter?" Her smile never disappeared. She calmly said, "You don't remember me, do you? I worked in the maternity ward. Rihanna was supposed to leave with me, but they gave her to you instead. I'm only here to take back what's mine." Time stopped. The room felt like it was closing in around us. She lunged toward Rihanna, but my husband tackled her before she could reach the baby. We tied her to a chair and called the police. The strange part, she never screamed. She never fought back. It was almost like she was tired of pretending. When the police arrived, she went with them peacefully, still humming that same creepy lullaby, even with handcuffs on. Her fingerprints revealed everything. Her real name was Eliza Montgomery. She used to be a neonatal nurse. After suffering a complete mental breakdown, she lost custody of her own daughter. The little girl later died in a fire at a foster home. After that, Eliza started targeting new mothers. She handed out flyers and offered babysitting services. 3 children disappeared before she ever came to our house. We were almost the 4th family. I don't want to know what happened to those children. I don't even want to know if they're alive or dead. What we lived through is already enough to haunt us forever. Even now, every single night before I go to bed, I check underneath Rihanna's bed, and I always turn off the baby monitor. But sometimes, when Rihanna is alone in her room, I hear that same strange melody,
and the second I open the door, there's nobody there except Rihanna standing in front of the mirror, smiling.
I went on a hunting trip deep into the woods all by myself because I wanted to feel some peace and quiet. There was something about the forests of Arizona that always made me feel like they were the perfect place to escape the stress of everyday life and finally relax. Hunting was never just a hobby to me. It was the best way to clear my mind. I packed all of my hunting gear, but I left my phone behind. On trips like this, I never bring it with me. It's nothing but a distraction, and I don't need it out there. I set up my tent just before sunset. A little while later, the crackling fire was the only sound breaking the silence of the forest. The stars filled the sky without the city lights washing them out. But for some reason, this time felt different. It was the first time I'd ever had a nightmare while being out in nature. In the dream, I heard creepy whispers all around me. I woke up terrified more than once, but every time I told myself they were just dreams, just my imagination. The forest around me was still as quiet as ever. When morning came, I headed deeper into the woods. A hunter has to be brave. You can't be afraid of every little thing. I walked for hours until something strange caught my eye. A dirty boot. It was partially buried in the dirt, with only a small part sticking out. At first, I figured it was just some old boot someone had thrown away years ago. Then I saw the bone. A human bone was sticking out from beneath the soil. It was obvious the flesh had decomposed a long time ago. All that was left was the skeleton. I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed the shovel from my gear and started digging. The more I dug, the more bones I uncovered. A leg bone, parts of a spine, a rib cage, and shattered pieces of a skull. My hands started shaking as I realized what I was looking at. I was standing over the remains of someone who had been dead for years. Maybe it was another hunter who got lost in the forest. But if that was true, who buried the body? My mind couldn't come up with a single explanation that made sense. Still, I had to keep moving. I couldn't spend the rest of the day trying to solve a mystery. After walking for several more hours, I found another body. One arm was tangled in the branches of a tree in a way that didn't look natural. The fingers were twisted and stiff. On a large rock nearby, there was a skull. The empty black eye sockets felt like they were staring right at me. That's when I connected everything. The first body, and now this one. There was no way this was an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a graveyard. Someone had intentionally buried bodies all over this forest. But who was collecting human remains? The smell stayed with me the entire way back to my tent. It was rotten and unbearable. That night, while I was lying inside my tent, I heard the whispers again. This time, they were louder, and they weren't coming from a dream. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't wild animals. They were real whispers. Whispers I couldn't understand. I couldn't sleep anymore, so I stepped outside and sat by the campfire, trying to calm myself down. Then I heard footsteps. They weren't light like mine. They were heavy. With every step, I could hear dry leaves and branches snapping against the ground.
I quickly put out the fire and hid behind the bushes, gripping my hunting knife as tightly as I could. I tried to keep my breathing as quiet as possible. The footsteps kept getting closer until I finally saw a figure emerge from between the trees. It was a tall man dragging several large black bags behind him. As he got closer, I could finally see him clearly. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled over his head. A horrible, rotten smell was coming from the bags. I froze and watched without making a sound. He started digging into the ground with incredible speed and precision, like he'd done it hundreds of times before. As he dug, he whispered strange words under his breath. I couldn't understand what he was saying. Then he opened the first bag. Inside were bloody human body parts. The sight was so horrifying that my whole body shook. Without meaning to, I stepped on a fallen tree branch. Crack! The man instantly lifted his head and turned toward the sound. His face was still hidden beneath the hood. Then he shouted, "Who's there?" His voice was filled with anger and pure threat. I froze in terror. Then I watched him grab the large shovel he'd been using. He started walking straight towards the place where I'd made the noise, towards me. I ran as fast as I possibly could. I didn't care about the branches slamming into my face or the bushes tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I heard him screaming for me to stop. His footsteps kept getting closer. He was catching up. I forced myself to run even faster, even though my body felt like it was about to give out. Because I knew if he caught me, I'd end up as another body stuffed inside one of those black bags. I looked back only once. The distance between us was getting smaller. Then his hood slipped off. I saw his eyes. They were filled with pure evil. His face was rough, cold, and terrifying. Suddenly, I tripped. I hit the ground hard. I tried to push myself back up, but when I turned around, he was standing right behind me. He slowly raised the shovel over his head, ready to bring it down on me. Then, a deafening sound shattered the silence of the forest. A massive truck was passing on the nearby road, blasting its horn. That sound distracted him for just a few seconds. He was afraid someone might notice him. Those few seconds saved my life. I jumped to my feet and started running again. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the keys into the door. I finally managed to unlock it, start the engine, and speed away from that nightmare. I drove straight to the police station. I had to report what I'd seen. The man chasing me had to be a serial killer. The police asked me a lot of questions, but the way they looked at me made me feel like they'd heard this story before, even though none of the previous victims had survived to tell it. This story is inspired by the real case of a Kimva named Walter Mitchell. He was arrested in December 2020 after investigators discovered human remains and dismembered body parts buried in multiple locations throughout an Arizona forest. Police had received reports from several people who were out on hunting trips in the area. However, the case still hasn't reached a final verdict to this day.
We live in a time when things happen that you would never even imagine. I'm going to tell you what happened to my sister. This is a true story, but before I start, please don't forget to leave a like. My sister was a young girl. She was rebellious and moody, just like most people her age.
I used to work somewhere close to her university, and one day I stopped by to pick her up and take her home. I found her standing there arguing with a guy who was a classmate of hers. As soon as she saw me, she went quiet, left him, and got into the car with me. She didn't say a single word the entire way home. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but I decided to leave it alone and ask her later when she felt like talking. The next day was a day off. I went to my sister's room because I wanted to talk to her for a little while and ask her about that guy. She was sitting at her computer like usual. I said, "So, what are you doing today? Want to watch a movie together?" She looked at me but ignored what I said. I knew there was an age difference between us, and teenagers can be hard to deal with, but I was trying my best to be close to her. I asked her, "What are you so busy with?" She said, "Nothing. I'm browsing the dark web. There's a website here where you can ask any question, no matter how crazy or illegal it is, and you'll find someone who'll answer you. The people on here are really scary, and that's because nobody can track them. The dark web is really hard to trace." I said, "Okay, but why are you even on there? That's not safe at all." What my little sister told me really worried me, so I decided to see for myself what she was looking at, and I was shocked by what I saw. I went to the website she had told me about and found people asking really strange and disturbing questions. There was one guy asking how to get rid of his mother's body without anyone finding out. At first, I thought he was joking, until I saw people actually answering him with disturbing ways to hide the body. That's when I got terrified. I closed the website immediately and decided I had to make sure my sister stayed away from those sites. The next day, I went to the market with my sister. I told her about what I had seen the day before and the horrifying answers people were giving. I told her, "Don't go on those websites again. I'm worried about you." But I was shocked by her reaction. She made fun of what I was saying and told me, "You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do. Don't act like you're my big sister. I'm not a little kid anymore." I didn't argue with her anymore because I knew how stubborn she was. If I kept warning her, she'd probably do the exact opposite. But I wish I had tried harder before she did the thing that changed our lives forever. One day, my sister went to study at her friend's house, and I was sitting at the table having lunch with my dad and mom. My mom said, "I'm really worried about your sister. I feel like she's doing something she shouldn't be doing." I asked her, "Why are you saying that, Mom?" She said, "I was cleaning her room yesterday and I found some really strange things under her bed." I quickly went to my sister's room and looked under the bed. I found a long rope and 4 candles that looked strange. They were wrapped together with a rope like snakes, along with a half-burned piece of paper. I couldn't even tell what was written on it. I said, "No, that's enough. My sister has gone too far. I have to do something." The next day, I went to her university and looked for the classmate she had been arguing with. I asked him, "Why were you two arguing?" What he told me completely shocked me. He said, "Laura and I used to be really close friends, but I stopped talking to her because one day she asked me to perform some satanic rituals with her that she had read about on the dark web. She told me those rituals would make us stronger and give us control, and that we'd live forever, but I refused." What he told me made me extremely worried about my sister, so I rushed back home to talk to her. When I saw her, her eyes were strangely red. I immediately suspected that she had performed those rituals while she was at her friend's house. I called out to her, but she didn't answer. I ran to her room and she slammed the door shut in my face. I yelled, "Laura, open the door. I know what you're planning to do. This is witchcraft. Don't follow those demons. They're going to destroy your life. Open the door right now." Instead of opening the door, she screamed at me. "Why do you care? Leave me alone. Stop getting involved in my life and focus on your own. I'm not a little kid anymore. I'll come out when I feel like it." Her words really upset me. I felt insulted, so I went and sat in the living room. I figured I'd talk to her when she finally came out.
That night, my dad and mom weren't home. They had somewhere to go, so it was just me and my sister in the house. I stayed sitting on the couch, waiting for her to come out so I could talk to her. But I don't know what happened. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, I found myself tied up by my hands and feet with tape over my mouth. The first thing that came to my mind was that a burglar had broken into the house and attacked me. I was worried about my sister. I tried to scream and call for her, but no sound came out. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the door was locked from the inside. Then I heard someone coming. The person who walked in was my sister, but she was completely different. She was dressed all in black and she was staring at me with an evil look in her eyes. That's when I realized she was the one who had tied me up after somehow knocking me out. But why? She ran away from me and let out a creepy laugh. I thought, that's it, she's completely lost her mind. She said, "I know you want to stop me from doing what I'm about to do, but you can't." Then she told me something that completely shocked me. She said she had discovered a way through the dark web from a group of Satan worshippers that would give her supernatural powers and eternal life. But there was one condition: she had to give up her human body and end her life. I couldn't understand what she was saying. I wanted to scream at her, "What are you talking about?" But I didn't get the chance. Laura shocked me even more. I kept screaming while trying to free myself so I could stop her from doing what she was planning, but I couldn't. Then she said, "Don't worry, sis, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to move from one dimension to a better one, and I'll become stronger." I felt like she had completely lost her mind, or that she was possessed by a demon. Her eyes were moving randomly, and she had this terrifying smile on her face. And then something happened that I never thought anyone could ever witness. I watched my sister die right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to save her. I just kept crying and crying until I passed out. When I woke up, my family had arrived, and the police were there. They carried my sister's body out of the house. She died right in front of my eyes. To this day, I still can't forget what happened. It left me traumatized. My sister destroyed herself and destroyed our entire family. Please, pay attention to your children and your siblings. Know what they're doing online. And don't ever think about going on the dark web, not even out of curiosity, because it's extremely dangerous. And believe me, there have been many incidents connected to it, even in the Arab world. Please, stay safe.